So at this point, we've got the ability to create a cart, meaning that we've got our route set up, which is basically our orders route. So we go and take a look at that. We've tested this out with Postman, but if we end up taking a look, and we have this under our users route because it's nested under our users, and so we've got the ability to post up here to our, let's start from the top here. We've got our, these are for our line items, and this is for our order itself. One of the things we could probably end up doing at some point is actually using this user ID as a, actually instead of the request.user, what this might give us the ability to do later on is have an administrator or something along the lines go in and actually, you could think about a scenario where an administrator might want to create a cart for a user and put some items in it. That's something that we might want to do at some point, in which case we would probably end up either modifying this method or getting the actual user from this user ID. There's a couple of different things we could do with that. Anyway, this allows us to go and create our cart, and here we are sending back not only the cart but also the line items and the products. And here we are creating a line item, which is a product ID and a quantity. And here we're deleting a line item where the only thing that we end up needing is the ID of the line item. Again, some of this stuff should be tightened up for security at some point, but again, we're just sort of getting a minimum viable product to be able to put some items in the cart. The one thing that we're missing is having a cart that's on the client that we could add to. So let's start building that out, and let's actually make sure that we've got our app running here. One thing that's going to be important is that we have gulp running. So I think I'm actually switch this out to master, which I did. So let's run gulp. Make sure that that runs. And let's go and open up this app. And so we're right now over here where we can log in as a user. Now, again, the functionality we're going to do with this branch, let's actually go and create this branch. Let's go over here and we'll say git checkout user can, I'll be more specific about authenticated user can create a cart. And if we go and want to describe really what should be happening here, user ends up logging in, so we'll use Obama, and we'll specify that this is going to be POTUS is the password. And when we do this, we want to see a couple of things. When we go to the products page, we want to be able to add to this user's cart. Maybe up here we want to see a link for the cart. Maybe also just next to that link for the cart, maybe we want to see a number of line items that they have. So one thing that we're going to, just in terms of how we're going to accomplish this, if you go and you look at the application, there are some hooks that we can hook into. One of the hooks, and this is actually pretty useful in an application, one of the hooks that we could hook into is under FSA pre-built. We'll see that there are some auth events. These are constants in Angular, so this way you don't have to sort of remember these magic strings. You could inject auth events, and what we're going to be interested in is going to be login success. And so when a user ends up logging into the application, we could see here that our root scope ends up broadcasting that login, that the login is successful. And what we can do is we could create a service that is going to listen for this event. And what this is going to allow us to do, and again, we'll just focus on the logged in user. And so our plan is to listen for this event. When this event ends up occurring, what we're going to do is we're going to end up loading the cart. And I'm going to call this loading the cart remotely, because this is going to be a cart that's on our server as opposed to a non-authorized user where we're going to just store the cart locally. But we're not going to do that yet. We're going to sit on this branch. We're only going to be concerned about the authenticated user. So user ends up logging in. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up listening for this event. When we end up on this event, we're going to go to the server. We're going to call our route to end up getting the user's cart. And one of the things that I find to be really helpful with these sorts of things is to, again, think about this source of truth. And on the server, we're going to have this source of truth, which is going to be our cart. And what we're going to end up doing is we're going to basically be always using that one copy of the cart. So our app is always going to be updated. So for instance, if we're showing information about the cart on the top of the page and showing the line items, when we end up adding a line item to the cart, since it's looking at the same object, on a digest cycle, we'll see that it ends up getting updated. And that's what we'll end up focusing on next. So what I want to do here is I want to create, on the client, a cart service. I'm going to call this cart. I'm going to call this cart service, and we'll go over here, and this is going to be an Angular module. Excuse me, we've got our app, so I'm going to say app.factory cart service. Now, the interesting thing about this, even though this file loads, and we can tell that this file is going to load, if I just put an alert here, hello. And again, if we're running gulp and we went back, as long as we don't have any errors, we should see that gulp is going to finish. And if I go back here and I reload this page or any page in my app, I'll see this. So I know that this ended up loading. But one of the things that I want to do is I actually want to do something with my cart service. Now, my cart service won't be used unless I end up injecting it somewhere. But if you want to make sure that something is run, you want to make sure your service ends up getting loaded. We know we're going to use it at some point, but just have a little bit more of a control over it. What we can do is we can do a run block. And a run block allows us to do something like this. So we can inject our cart service. Now, if we went to do this now, we'd actually run into a little bit of an error. And the error that we'd run into, well, see if you could guess it, but if I go and I reload this, again, assuming this builds, and I reload this, and I open up my tools here, and if we go over here and look at our console, we'll see that we get an error, and the error that we have is that if you're going to define yourself as a factory, you have to return something. So as long as we do this, we'll return something. Again, give it a second to build. All those files have to end up compiling. And now we no longer have any errors. But what we're going to do here is let's go back and let's look at our, under our browser, let's look at, under FSA, let's look at where we are publishing this event, or another term for that is broadcasting this event. And what I'm going to do is do the flip side of broadcasting, right? The complement to it, I guess, is a better word. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to inject a couple things here, but I'm going to specify root scope on this. I'm going to want to call a function. I don't really care about any parameters that get passed here, and I don't think any parameters are getting passed. But if I go over here and I do a couple different things, first of all, I need my root scope. I also need these constants, which are auth events. Again, these basically are just so you don't have to necessarily remember these strings. And let's do one other thing here. We've got this session service, and the session service will just give us the logged in user. So if I go over here and I do console, at this point I should be logged in, and if I do session.user, I should see that user. So now if we rerun this, we'll give it a second to build here. I have to log in, so I'm going to log out. And let's see. So we are getting this from the cart service. And let's see. I think I might not have the correct variable here. Let's take a look at what session is, because that's a service that I'm interested in. So even on a reload, it should be giving us some information. Let's take a look at this. So, of course, I was actually looking at putting the wrong thing in here. This is going to be login success, not log out. And this should bode a little bit better for us. So even on a page reload, if you remember what's happening here, we're actually going up to the server and we're looking at the session on the server to figure out who the logged in user is. So now if we do this, we should see that we have our user object here. There's some information we could probably get on our user object, right? Here's the email, some other information that we have here. The one that we really want to deal with is going to be the ID. And again, just to sort of show you this, if I was to go over here and say console.log session.user, and again, all we need is the user, and I go over here, let's do it one more time. It takes a second to build here. So again, we first get in here. We've got the user is not logged in. But again, what happens in the application is it makes a call up to the server to end up getting the logged in user. When that happens, we're wiring into it. And someone had asked me the question of, well, if you want to do something like getting your cart, why not do it over here, when in fact you are logged in? So I copied the wrong one before. The one I was sort of interested in was the logging in correctly. So let's just see that this is in here. So once we end up logging in successfully, we have this. So theoretically, you could go and do stuff with your cart service in here. But what that's going to do is really muddy up the water a lot. Muddy up the waters, meaning that your login service is not just going to be responsible for logging in and broadcasting when you're logging in and that sort of thing. It's also going to be responsible for the cart. And you really don't want that sort of dependency. That's going to end up leading to a lot of spaghetti code and code that's not going to be maintainable. You want to think of these services and factories as having, as few responsibilities, hopefully just one responsibility. Our cart service is just going to be responsible for managing our cart. And our auth service should just be managing whether or not we're logged in. So you want to separate those things out. So again, that's what broadcasting and subscribing allows us to do. So the next thing we'll end up doing is we'll take a look at getting the cart when the user ends up logging in and how we could end up, we're going to end up using that cart. So what we're going to do with this cart service is that we're going to do a couple different things here. One of the things we're going to do is let's create a variable called cart. And let's in fact just expose it with a property of our cart. And what we're going to do is we're going to have this ability to go and load the cart. So what happens when we end up loading the cart? And here we'll specify when you end up logging in correctly, we're going to say cart service load cart. And again, we're going to load this cart remotely. We're going to end up getting it from the service. And a couple of things I could take out of here. I'm going to use this, but I'm not going to use it here. And if I go up here to load cart, let me actually bring in my session. I'm also going to need my HTTP. And so when I want to load this cart, I'm going to return HTTP. And if you remember, this is going to be a post. And this is going to be to API orders. This is going to be the session user ID. And this is going to end up going to, I have this incorrectly, right? Remember, this URL is actually going to be users, this user's ID, and this is going to be orders. And this should end up going and either getting the cart or creating the cart. And when I end up coming back from here, again, let's name things correctly. This is going to be result, which is going to be our payload that ends up coming back, plus headers or anything else that we want to look at. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say Angular copy. and I'm going to copy my result.data to this cart. So if anyone is hanging on to my cart at this point, they'll end up seeing this update, and we'll end up returning this cart. So this is going to be something that's asynchronous, right? We're going to remotely end up going to get our cart, meaning that we're getting our cart from our service. And let's just see if this doesn't throw any errors, see if we've forgotten anything. We should actually see a call. If we look at our network, let's try this one more time. And if we look at our XHR objects, we should see that we've gone to orders and we've got back our cart. So one thing we could do here, just sort of building this out a little bit at a time, is let's go to our common pages, and we'll go to our nav bar. And I'm going to want to customize this a little bit. So I'm going to do something like this. I will specify that I'm going to have another tag here. And I'm not going to do an ng repeat here. And I'm just going to, for now, I'm just going to show this, whether or not the user is logged in or not. Eventually, we will end up being concerned about this. And my href for this, UI sref, is going to be cart. That doesn't exist yet. And just for the sake of argument, let's pull this out of here. Let's go over here, and I'm just going to put in here cart. So on our scope, we're going to end up putting in the cart, and quite simply, what we can do from our nav bar is if I go to my nav bar just to get this on the scope, here's my link. I could go up here and I could specify I want my cart service, and simply scope.cart equals cart service.cart. So again, we're exposing this cart that we have in our cart service, and I just want to show it, and right now I'm just going to show it next to this link. It'll look a little bit silly, but we'll figure out how to set it up correctly. Again, we have to go back and take a look at our cart service, right? Our cart service is going to be our cart that we're getting from our server is going to be copied into this local variable. And actually, one mistake that I made here is I want this to always be the same object. So this is going to be this object that we're going to copy this into, so our scope is always looking at the same object. Again, this whole idea of a source of truth. So now if I reload this, we'll see that in fact we've got our cart up here. Again, we probably want to make some provisions of how we're going to handle this if we end up logging out or not. Let's see, if we do log out, right, we'll still see our cart, but if I end up refreshing the page, right, we'll see that this is going to be empty. So one of the things that we could do here is we could say, hey, look, if you're not logged in, we don't want to just show an empty cart. Let's modify our cart service a little bit. And we'll specify that our cart is going to have an empty collection of line items. Just to show something here. And we'll specify that on our nav bar, just so we don't have this huge cart thing here, we'll just show not the whole cart, but the line items dot length, and we'll just put it in some parentheses. This is, just a number of items that are number of line items in our cart. Again, if you got sort of fancy with this, we could keep track of the total value that's in our cart. Right now, this should be 0, but if we end up logging in, we can now go here and we can see that we've got one item in our cart, and we can actually start setting up the functionality for our cart. And we could either set up the cart page, or we could start hooking into the routes that we have now on the products page and actually make posts up to the server. And again, what we would expect to see is that these line items go up. Again, it's not wired up now. It's not really doing anything now, but that's going to be the next piece of functionality that we'll end up adding. So now let's focus a little bit on the products page. If we end up looking at the products page, this was really one of the first things that we ended up doing. We've got this products control, and we've got this create line item, which we're just logging out here. So if we went back over here and we go to our console, we would see that we're just logging out these line items that we're adding, right? And what we're going to end up doing here is that we want to be able to do something like this. And we'll specify that we are going to do something like cart service, create line item. And what does a line item consist of? Well, a line item is going to consist of two things. Line item is going to have a product ID, which we should have here, and also a quantity. So we're going to end up creating this line item, and what we can end up doing here, and I could have passed this directly, but you saw here we actually have some additional properties that are here. Well, nothing, we just have this hash key, and we've got this product, but I just really wanted, the only things that I really need here are going to be, and actually I did mine incorrectly, we want to get the product ID and we want to get the quantity, so this in fact is going to be line item product.id. And what we're going to do here is that once we end up setting up this method, I'm not even going to worry about whether it's successful, although actually what we probably should do here, now that I'm thinking about it, is eventually we're going to redirect to the cart, but we don't have that set up yet. I'm just going to say console log success, although we'll be able to see that. And if there's an error, we probably want to handle that in some way. For now, maybe just log it. So at this point, if we went to run this, and we click on add to cart, right, I'm going to get an error because cart service doesn't have a create line item property. So let's now, again, focus back to our cart service. We're going to specify a create line item. And how's that going to work? Well, it's going to be sort of a similar URL to this. If you remember, that URL is going to go to users, session ID, orders. And at this point, we're going to have a ID for this particular order, right? This is just going to be our cart. So we can now add plus cart ID. And this is going to be a post, and we are going to post to line items, right? It's a RESTful route, so we can we don't have to memorize that. We know it's the user's orders. We need the order ID. We end up getting that from the cart, and we end up posting to line items. And what are we going to send? We're going to send a line item. So we will pass a line item in here. And if we end up doing that, let's test out if this ends up working. There's some other things we're going to have to do, but if we reload this, and I go and I decide to add something else to the cart, okay, I see success, but notice I don't see this number go up. And if I reload this page, but when I reload, I see, in fact, I do have 2 items in my cart. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that our cart, there's a couple different ways to do this. I think the simplest thing is to just put in a then. And I'm going to have a this and that problem here, because what I really want to do is I want to call the load cart method. So I'm going to do that equals this. This is my factory itself, and I'm going to specify return that load cart. Again, I never really am doing anything with the cart that gets passed back, but notice that what happens when I call load cart, it goes up, it's going to basically copy the cart to my source of truth, and as long as I'm dependent on my source of truth, then I should be in pretty good shape. So if I go back here and I reload this, every time that I end up adding an item to my cart, let's make sure that that loaded. So you see every time we do this, this ends up going up here. Now, let's, at this point, now we're able to add items to the cart. Let's actually be able to take a look at the cart. So what we're going to want to do is set up our cart, as a link here, so that when we click on this, right now, if we clicked on this, we'd get an error because we don't have any state for cart. But if we end up setting up a state for cart, what we could do is we could end up grabbing our cart and we could end up displaying the items in our cart and do the last part, which is to be able to remove items from the cart. So that's the next thing we'll take a look at. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is let's create a state for the cart. And what we can do here, again, we could put the state in here if we wanted to, but I sort of like the idea of putting these in. Again, for a smaller app, I think it's fine to specify that we're going to have a state for cart. And this is a big part of our application, so theoretically maybe we would set this up in its own file underneath cart. But for now, the only thing that we really need to do is give this a URL. And again, I just like to see that this is going to be working by maybe doing this. And so it's not a template URL. We're just going to put cart in here. And if I reload this and I go to cart, I could see that that ends up showing up. And let's do something kind of interesting here. Let's specify that what we're going to do. Let's see how this works out here. We'll specify function, do a controller. And this is going to be, we're going to need our let's see. Let's specify that what we're going to do here is we're going to end up passing into our controller both the scope and the cart. Again, just sort of assuming that source of truth is going to be working here, if we say scope.cart equals cart, and if we do a resolve, resolve might not be totally necessary here, but if we end up doing a resolve, we can specify that we're going to get a cart, and where are we going to get that cart from? Again, we'll just sort of focus on this source of truth. It might not be loaded at the time that it comes in here, but it will eventually end up getting loaded, right? Because the users, again, we're just focusing on the logged in user. So if we specify cart service, and we're going to return our source of truth, which is cart service.cart. And so that should end up going here. That should end up going on our scope. And let's just see that we are able to make it to this route, which we can. And just for the sake of argument, let's go in here and in our template specify cart. Do that one more time. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you can sort of see the delay here, but initially you have no line items, and now you see all the stuff that we have in our cart. So again, that's for me, a pretty good indication of how this sort of source of truth works. We're always just making sure that we update the same object. It's something that I think is really useful to understand. And let's go over here, and instead of actually putting this directly in here, which is not going to be easy to maintain, we're going to say /js cart, say cart.html. So now once we end up doing that, we could really get ourselves in the same spot by specifying cart.html and go in here and see if this is going to do the same thing, which it does. And what we'll do over here is let's do a, let's specify, I guess just for the sake of argument, to keep it kind of simple, let's do a class of list group. We'll put this inside of a container. Again, our goal here is just to display what is in the cart. And we're going to say list item class is going to be list group item. And we're going to do ng repeat. What are we going to repeat? We're going to say we're repeating our line items. Line item in cart dot line items. And what are we going to show? Well, let's show, we'll specify the line item dot product, which we should have name, followed by line item dot quantity. And let's take a look and see what that looks like. And so here we've got all our line items. Now again, what we probably want to do eventually is we probably want to modify this and again put our foods and our bars and our badges together in one line item. But for now, this is fine. Let's just do one other thing here. And we'll go over here. Let's also just display the price. So we've got the product, and we're going to specify the price. And we'll do that in the form of currency. So we could say currency. And we'll specify maybe all right, and every time we could increase this, we could make this go up. But again, this is probably way too much stuff in our cart. So maybe we'll put something in here like a button, class, BTN. Let's make it BTN warning, remove from cart. And let's float this over to the right. So we'll say pull right. And we'll just do a BR clear all so our floats don't get messed up. So now we've got the ability here to remove from our cart. And let's also just give this a little bit of a title. Probably going to look a little silly, but that's okay. So we've got our cart, and we want to be able to remove an item from our cart. So just to sort of start that up, we'll do an ng click. So we've got create line item. Let's call destroy line item. And of course, if we want to destroy a line item, this is a resource. We're going to call this destroy line item. And if we go back, and eventually we could pull this out and put this in its own cart controller, which would probably make sense. What if we go over here and say scope, destroy line item, function, we're passing in a line item. And we could say console.log line item. And if we reload this, we should see this line item that we now want to destroy. And of course, our controller is not going to do the work, but it's going to be our cart service that destroys the line item. So here we're just going to specify a cart service, destroy line item. Of course, this doesn't exist yet. So if we go and run that and click on this, we'll get an error that destroy line item doesn't exist. And that's sort of the last part of this cart, which we'll end up creating. So right now our service, we go and look at our cart service. We can see that we've got this create line item. And this is going to be pretty similar. The only difference is that when we're getting rid of a line item, we're not doing a post. We're doing a delete. And now we've got the ID of the line item, so we don't need the line item itself. We're just going to add to it the ID of the line item. And of course, once we end up doing that, we want to make sure our source of truth is going to be accurate again. So we specify that we're going to load the cart. But again, it just makes it nice for us because even though we are returning a cart from load cart, it doesn't really matter because whoever is using this is looking at this same cart. So we can modify this and say that this is going to be destroy line item. And if we do this, and let's test this out. So now if we remove this from cart, we should see that our list is going to, I could get rid of this Baz. Let's see if that's working. That looks a little weird here, right? I want to get rid of this 1,000 items. Okay, that looked like it worked. Let's take a look. Yeah, I think it's tricky because I have a lot of the same items. So we could probably test this out a little bit easier. Now we have no items in our cart. We can see that it works up here, works down here. We go to our products. We specify that we want to have, 10 Bazes. And what we also want to do here that I've neglected to do is also when we end up adding something to our cart. And again, what's controlling this is our controller here. So under our products controller, which we actually have up here, we were creating a line item. Instead of saying console log success, let's actually move over to our cart so we can see that we've added the item to cart. State.go cart. Let's reload this. So we've got our products. One of the things that I'm noticing here that's bothering me is that I didn't see the URL change here. So let's just take a look and see if this was incorrect, right? The URL here is going to be cart. Notice that. Always look at the URLs just to see that they should match what you're looking at. So here we are on our cart. And so if I say I'm going to get 3 foods, now I'm here, I decided I want to have these foods, I could end up removing them. I could remove this, and maybe we should have a message that says you have no line items in your cart. But right now we actually have our functionality for an authenticated user to add items to their cart. Just take a look and see what we've got here. Move up a little bit. I was inside of another directory. One more up. So this is what I have at this point. What did we add here? Well, we modified our nav bar. We modified our config. We ended up modifying our products control. Again, eventually we probably should create a cart control. And we ended up adding basically a view for our cart as well. So at this point, we could say that this feature is done. And we could say git add dot, git commit, an authorized user can create a cart. And at this point, we would probably push it up to GitHub and get it merged. But another thing we could do is we could check out our master. And we could specify git.merge, and we could actually do it local, authenticated user can create a cart. And it'll end up pulling all these files in for us. So probably the next thing that we want to do here is to specify, this is a little bit of the trickier ones, but it's a little bit easier that we have this functionality in here. So we could check out and we could say non-auth user can create cart. And so that's in the next video, that's what we'll take a look at.